Tonight, the test works. The next time we see that capsule, it should be holding the first of 33 men to be rescued after 7 weeks in a Chilean mine. I'm Harry Smith. Also tonight, a medical first. Doctors inject embryonic stem cells into a patient with spinal cord injuries, the first such FDA-approved test on a human. Yet another controversial remark from the GOP candidate for governor of New York, this one aimed at gays. And everything you always wanted to know about sex, Steve Hartman was not afraid to ask.
With
Tonight, the test works. The next time we see that capsule, it should be holding the first of 33 men to be rescued after 7 weeks in a Chilean mine. I'm Harry Smith. Also tonight, a medical first. Doctors inject embryonic stem cells into a patient with spinal cord injuries, the first such FDA-approved test on a human. Yet another controversial remark from the GOP candidate for governor of New York, this one aimed at gays. And everything you always wanted to know about sex, Steve Hartman was not afraid to ask.
from CBS News World Headquarters in New York, this is the CBS Evening News with Katie Couric.
Good evening. Katie is off tonight. The suspense has been building for 68 days. Now the rescue of those 33 miners trapped 2,000 feet below the Earth's surface in Chile may be just hours away. The rescue drill broke through to them over the weekend, and starting at midnight tomorrow night, the men are to be brought up one by one, a process that could take 2 days. The steel rescue capsule was tested successfully today when it was lowered to within 50 feet of where the miners are stranded. Up on the surface, their families continue their vigil, hoping the long ordeal is finally coming to an end. Seth Doan is at Camp Hope at the San Jose mine site in Chile. Seth, good evening.
Good evening, Harry. For the trapped miners, today's successful test was one enormous step closer to freedom. The final countdown is on. The first of 33 men could emerge in just 36 hours. During today's key test, the capsule was lowered 2,000 feet down the rescue shaft. Engineers stopped it just 46 feet short of where the miners are trapped. Chile's mining minister joked with reporters as to why.
We didn't send it down because we can risk that somebody could jump in.
Spirits have been high here since early Saturday morning when the drill finally broke through. And celebrations quickly broke out. When the drill made contact with where the miners are trapped, it was an American at the controls. Jeff Hart is from Colorado and was called here to help. You're feeling right now at this moment?
On top of the world.
This morning, steel tubes, each about the size of a school bus, were installed to reinforce the most unstable part of the rescue tunnel. And now a winch system is being installed. A 270 horsepower motor will hoist up the capsule. The rescue must wait until the concrete base holding the winch system hardens. Even an hour away from the mine, preparations for an imminent rescue are also underway. Chile's government knows this is their big chance in the global spotlight. So here in the city of Copiapó, even the crosswalks have a fresh coat of paint, as does the hospital where the miners will be brought to for observation. But well before they arrive here, doctors have already been keeping a close eye on them, deep underground, where the miners have now been put on a strict diet, including a chocolate drink designed to boost nutrition and a regimen of aspirin to guard against blood clots on the 20-minute journey to the surface. They'll be wearing compression socks and a girdle to keep blood pressure steady. For night rescues, the miners will be wearing sweaters because while it's more than 90 degrees where they're trapped, it's nearly freezing at the surface. This is your son. Families are getting ready too. Do you do a dress rehearsal of what you'll do when you see your son?
Yes, I'll hug him and I'll tell him I love him.
Jimmy Sanchez is 19 years old and is the youngest trapped in the mine. How is it to look at these pictures, to see him, to think about him?
I get emotional because I see him and I remember him as a kid, but he'll be home soon.
Now, just how soon the miners might be home may be measured now not in weeks or months, but days. Harry?
Even hours. What are the biggest concerns for the miners on the trip through the rescue shaft?
Well, one of the biggest concerns, Harry, is a panic attack, and they're actually installing video cameras inside that capsule to try to look for any signs of that.
And then what are the plans for the miners once they reach the surface?
Once the miners do reach the surface, they will go immediately to a medical evaluation, which would take a couple of hours. If they're cleared, okayed by a doctor, they will be permitted to meet with 2 to 3 family members before they are flown off to a hospital for a more thorough observation. Harry?
Seth Doan in Chile tonight. Thank you. In Afghanistan, the U.S. military is investigating a rescue mission that failed. At first, officials said a 36-year-old British aid worker died when one of her captors detonated a suicide bomb. But now, Elizabeth Palmer reports it appears the U.S. forces who went to save her may have accidentally killed her.
Linda Norgrove was kidnapped almost 2 weeks ago while on the job for an American aid organization. The military finally located her in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan. Convinced that rescue was her only hope of survival, they mounted a raid last Friday night. Today, Britain's Prime Minister received a phone call from the top U.S. commander in Afghanistan, David Petraeus, who told him that video filmed during the operation may show that Norgrove was actually killed by her rescuers.
That evidence and subsequent interviews with the personnel involved suggest that Linda could have died as a result of a grenade detonated by the task force during the assault.
U.S. Special Forces rappelled down from helicopters near the compound where Norgrove was a prisoner. They fought their way through small arms fire toward her. Then there was at least one explosion which killed her. What and who caused it will now be the subject of a full military investigation. Of course, this comes as a terrible shock to the Norgrove family. As a friend said, knowing that Linda may have died at the hands of the very people who were trying to save her life somehow makes this tragedy even more painful. Elizabeth Palmer, CBS News, London.
For a lot of older Americans, this will be hard to swallow, the UnCOLA. For the second straight year, there will be no cost of living adjustment in 2011 for the more than 58 million Americans on Social Security. The average retiree now gets about $1,171 a month. This means your check will not be getting any bigger. Benefits are pegged to the Consumer Price Index. That index held steady in the past year, so no raise. A medical first in this country. In the first such test approved by the FDA, a patient has been injected with stem cells taken from a human embryo. The hope is these cells will eventually help repair recent spinal cord injuries. Medical correspondent Dr. John LaPook shows us how the treatment works.
Beautiful.
The scientist who designed the treatment has waited for this moment for years.
This clinical trial is a very historic moment in that it reflects a change in spinal cord injury research as we move from the bench to the bedside.
The procedure took place here at the Shepherd Center, a spinal cord and brain injury hospital in Atlanta. No details on the patient were released, but according to the study guidelines, the therapy is only for recent injuries, given within 7 to 14 days, and it's designed for patients paralyzed from the chest down.
I think they're going to get better, and I'm just dying to find out if I'm right.
When we visited Dr. Hans Kiersted's lab last March, he explained how the treatment works. In spinal cord injury, the insulation coating the wires in the cord is destroyed. Electrical messages from the brain can't get past the point of injury, and function is lost. Kiersted and his team figured out a way to turn stem cells into this cell.
This is actually the insulating material.
It makes insulation for the spinal cord. Millions of these cells were injected into the damaged area. The hope is by restoring the insulation, the spinal cord will work again.
Any benefit to that patient population is going to be really a home run.
The main goal of the study is to see if this treatment is safe, but doctors should know within 1 to 2 months if it's restoring any function. They'll be enrolling 10 patients over the next 2 years. Harry?
So we assume this has been tested already on animals and?
Harry, paralyzed rats, stand up and walk.
And if this does in fact work with people with spinal cord injuries, what else might it apply to?
Well, all sorts of other neurological conditions, but it's not just acute spinal cord injuries. I spoke to Dr. Hans Kierstead today, who's developing this treatment, and he said the problem is over time you get scar on the spinal cord, and that's why this is only for people with acute injury. But there's a new type of treatment that they're developing and other people around the world that's not going to only look at this type of stem cell, but another type of stem cell to treat people who have been paralyzed for months and even years. So we are right at the very beginning of this, and we're really going to have to see what happens.
John LaPook, thanks so much. To politics now. The race for governor of New York has been one of the more colorful contests in recent memory, in large part because of the language employed by the Republican candidate. Who was offended this week? The latest from Chief National Correspondent Byron Pitts.
Monday, during New York City's annual Columbus Day parade, a political brawl broke out. Republican Carl Paladino, a Buffalo multimillionaire developer, a Tea Party darling, and the self-described angry candidate today pushed back on charges his comments over the weekend were anti-gay.
I have absolutely no problem whatsoever with any gay rights. Only one, no marriage.
Paladino spoke to a group of Orthodox Jewish leaders Sunday. He criticized Democratic candidate Andrew Cuomo for marching in a gay pride parade with his teenage daughters, suggesting it set a bad example for children.
And I don't want them to be brainwashed into thinking that homosexuality is an equally valid or successful option. It isn't.
Those attitudes kill.
Gay rights advocates criticized Paladino's words and his timing after the assault of 3 reportedly gay men by an angry mob in the Bronx last week, and the suicide of a Rutgers University student that's been linked to gay bashing on the internet.
It perpetuates a stereotype that it's okay for bullies to commit violence against these kids because they aren't equal.
With Paladino trailing by double digits in the polls, political analysts see it differently.
This is both Paladino being Paladino and a desperate candidate doing what he has to. Why? Well, when you're ahead, you don't take risk. That's the Cuomo strategy. But when you're behind, like Paladino, you have to risk in order to get into the game.
As for Cuomo,
I think the comments that Mr. Paladino made were reckless. I think they were divisive.
The two will finally square off in their first debate next week. Byron Pitts, CBS News, New York.
In West Virginia, Democratic Senate candidate Joe Manchin is out with a new campaign ad that is tonight's Campaign 2010 hot sheet. The ad doesn't attack his Republican opponent. Instead, Manchin goes after the policies of his own party.
That's why the NRA... I'll take dead aim at the cap and trade bill because it's bad for West Virginia.
Manchin faces Republican John Racy in the battle for the Senate seat long held by the late Robert Byrd. Still ahead on the CBS Evening News, a travel magazine calls Bali the best island in Asia, but Steve Hartman finds trouble in paradise. And up next, an unprecedented look inside one of the world's most closed societies. Since the day it was founded, North Korea has been a puzzlement. It is a closed society and extremely poor, but with a huge military and quite determined to become a nuclear power. Over the weekend, there was a coming out party for the grandson of the country's founder, Kim Il-sung. Jim Axelrod traveled to Pyongyang to witness the spectacle.
On a viewing stand above a portrait of the nation's founder, Kim Il-sung, North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-il, and his son, Kim Jong-un, watched the largest military parade in the country's 62-year history this past weekend. 16,000 troops.
These parades take place every 5 or 10 years here in North Korea, but what makes this one different is us. The North Korean government has invited the Western media in, not only to see the country flex its military muscle, but to send an important symbolic message about its future.
Some of the missiles say defeat the U.S. military. It's a carefully choreographed rollout of Kim Jong-un, who's been tapped to take over when his 68-year-old father eventually steps down or dies. He's looking frail after a suspected stroke 2 years ago. Kim Jong-un is thought to be in his late 20s, educated in Switzerland, a huge fan of American professional basketball. But he is virtually unknown even to the people here. He had never even been named by the official state media until last week. But the North Koreans we spoke with, always in the presence of our government minder, were approving.
Will he make a good leader?
No question, said Ri Young Kwang, a 35-year-old photographer. I believe in him.
As you can see, calling the country's founder, Kim Il-sung, larger than life is actually a bit of an understatement here in North Korea. His image dominates all parts of life. This is a bride and groom recently married coming to pay their respects. The question is, will the people of North Korea one day be building a statue of his grandson?
To keep this dynasty going, they need to really make Kim Jong-un into another almost cult-like deity because North Korea is more like a cult than it is a country.
But it's difficult, if not impossible, to know what the average North Korean thinks of the regime in a country with wrenching poverty. A third of the children here are stunted by malnutrition, according to the UN.
Did you see the parade on television?
Yes, I saw it.
What did you think?
Well, it's wonderful, isn't it?
Jang Sol-hyang, our guide at a flower show in Pyongyang, was quite chatty until we asked her about the heir apparent.
What did you think when you saw Kim Jong-un on television?
Let's go upstairs and have a look first.
If the point was to gain wide exposure for Kim Jong-un's debut, the North Koreans succeeded. More than 100 reporters from 18 countries were here covering it. Extremely unusual, if not entirely unprecedented. Jim Axelrod, CBS News, Pyongyang, North Korea.
And still ahead, they're accepting deposits for a ride in space. President Obama enjoys a good book, but if you have written one, here is the wrong way to go about pitching it to him. A supporter threw his book toward Mr. Obama as he was campaigning yesterday in Philadelphia. The book missed the president, but not the attention of the Secret Service. The man was questioned and later released. It's not rare to find pocket change under a sofa cushion, but it might be worth looking behind the sofa as well. A man near Niagara Falls, New York did and pulled out what may be an unfinished painting by Michelangelo. The painting had been in his family for more than a century, but apparently no one knew its value. At least one expert thinks it's the real thing. Could make it worth as much as $300 million. It was 100 years ago today Theodore Roosevelt went where no president had gone before, up in an airplane. On October 11th, 1910, aviation pioneer Archie Hoxsey talked the then former president into joining him for a flight over St. Louis. It lasted 4 minutes and reached a height of about 50 feet. It would be 32 more years before a sitting president flew in an airplane, TR's fifth cousin, FDR. Fast forward 1 century to another first flight. Virgin Galactic's Spaceship Two flew solo yesterday, 45,000 feet above the Mojave Desert, then glided to a safe landing. Virgin founder Richard Branson says he hopes to conduct test flights into space next year. Tickets to ride on it are going to cost $200,000. 370 customers have already put down deposits. Still ahead, they said, "I do." Now she says she won't. They tell their story to Steve Hartman next. We end tonight with two characters straight out of the South Pacific. The region, not the musical. Although he wants nothing more than some enchanted evening, and she would just as soon wash that man right out of her hair. Here's Steve Hartman with Everybody in the World has a story.
Lift off. When we commissioned NASA to take a plastic inflatable globe into space, it was to help test our theory that no matter where you go on Earth, if you ask people about the things that matter most in their lives, you'll discover we really are all just the same. Go ahead. And now, thanks to Commander Jeff Williams' final random stab at the globe, we have the definitive story to prove it. This one takes us to southern Indonesia, to the island of Bali.
Everybody ready?
Where fate handed me perhaps my most relatable story ever.
Sirani ni Wayan.
Wayan Sriani lives with her husband, Wayan Kamar. Their first names are both Wayan.
Wayan and Wayan, that's easy.
When I first met them, their lives seemed so different from ours. He makes bamboo furniture by hand. She makes regular offerings to the Hindu gods. They live with their 2 children on just $10 a day. And yet, YN and YN say life is perfect, except for one nagging question they just can't seem to resolve. How many times a week should you love your spouse?
I want it to be every day.
Every day. She says, wrong answer. After spending all day cooking the meals, taking care of the kids, and gathering the banana leaves for the offerings, the last thing she's in the mood for is messing around. While he says he requires it to stay energized at work. Basically, he's a man with needs and she's a woman who needs sleep. He's the honeymoon, she's the headache. What's a guy to do?
I talk about this to almost everyone because I'm always looking for the best solution.
YN Kumar says he's tried meditation and yoga, but his drive just won't mellow. He also sent his wife to a healer who prescribed a boiling brew of leaves and liquids. She was supposed to drink it twice a day to feel frisky.
But she didn't drink it.
I don't really like to take a lot of medicines.
I kind of had to agree with her on this one and suggested to him that maybe he should forget the leaves and give petals a try.
Have you tried giving her flowers?
Never.
Never?
He says guys in Bali don't really give flowers, although he has asked his wife to suggest some other romantic things he could do.
I've asked her often, but she wouldn't answer.
I think you're just supposed to know.
Really?
It just goes to show that when you dig beneath race, religion, and politics, you'll almost always find someone you can relate to. In fact, after traveling around the world twice, telling strangers stories, I've concluded the only real difference between humans is that some people on Earth live for purpose and meaning, and the others are men.
You have a solution for me?
Do I have a solution for you?
Steve Hartman, CBS News, Bali.
I pay you $1 million.
You pay me $1 million. You're not the only one that would pay me $1 million.
That's the CBS Evening News. Katie will be back tomorrow. I'm Harry Smith. Thanks for joining us. I'll see you in the morning on The Early Show. Good night.